Okay. Is the sound working okay now? Anyone hear me? Okay. Boy, oh boy. Last week we saw that when you engaged in Kedusha activities, you have to focus your attention on the prayer, you have to focus your attention on Shema Yisrael, and therefore there are a lot of halachas which prevent you from doing these Kedusha activities in a situation where you might be distracted. You shouldn't daven when you're standing in the crossroads, where people walking by might bump you or distract you. You have to move out of the way when the camels are coming. Shouldn't daven there because you'll be distracted in the middle of the prayer. You shouldn't stand on a ladder when you daven because you have to pay attention not falling off the ladder. Some of your attention will be diverted from the kedusha to just not falling. The singing voice of the woman is distracting and therefore blocked, therefore prohibited while you're engaging in these kedusha activities. Now, this left us at the end of last week with the question: is this a problem which is limited to Kriya Shema, limited to when you have to focus your attention on Kedusha, or is the singing voice of woman in general prohibited? After all, the other thing is you're allowed to stand on a ladder, just not when you are engaged in Kedusha, in holy activities which demand concentration. Well, we saw that Rav Hai Gaon, one of the big names, Rav Hai Gaon, said, "Le'inyan Kriya Shema, as far as Kedusha activities are concerned, you're not allowed to hear the singing voice of woman," implying, he didn't say so, but clearly implying that if you're just going about your business, there's no particular problem with the singing voice of women, as long as it's a general activity and not part of trying to do the mitzvah of Shema Yisrael. And the Sri Yesh, Rav Weinberg, who we introduced at the very end of last week's shiur, comments, says in the Gemara, stam. The Gemara says stam without any further elaboration. Stam means without any further elaboration. The Gemara just says flat out, in an apodictic way, without any further elaboration, Kol Isha erva. The singing voice of women is erotic, and that sounds like a general pronouncement, not limited to the activities of Shema Yisrael and so forth. Mashma, the words of the Gemara imply Ben Nisua, Ben Penuya. It doesn't matter whether the woman is married or single. Lachain, Perish Demari Le'inyan Kriya Shema. Well, since the Gemara did not mention any distinction between married women and unmarried women, and since there's no particular prohibition in thinking about marrying an unmarried woman. After all, men have to marry women. It's okay to think about marrying someone who was unmarried. Only if she's married, it's adultery. You can't think about marrying her. According to the Chai Gaon, it's permissible to hear the singing voice of a penuya, an unmarried woman, a single woman, as long as you're not engaged in Kriya Shema. After all, you don't need that concentration. The married woman, that's something different. That gets us into the realm of adultery, and we don't want to do anything which might touch upon an adulterous relationship. But as long as she's unmarried, the Sri Age understands that Rav Hai Gaon intended to say that the singing voice of an unmarried woman is okay outside of Kriya Shema situations. So if the question is, does the opinion exist that the whole problem of the singing voice of women has to do with holy activities, Kriya Shema and so forth, does such opinion exist? The answer is yes. What about when you're not engaged in Kriya Shema? Is there an opinion out there which holds that you can hear the singing voice of unmarried women? Yes, the opinion exists. We just saw it on the previous screen. Ulam, however, the Gaon Mevilna, that's like the biggest name from the 18th century, the Gaon Mevilna disagrees with this whole approach. the approach of the um, of the of the Gaon, the approach of the Gaon of Vilna, Rav Eliyahu of Vilna, is as follows. These are his words. Pershu Talmidei Rabbeinu Yonah v'Agos Mamonias v'Mordechai v'Shara Poskim. The disciples of Rabbeinu Yonah. Most of what we know about Rabbeinu Yonah in Spain's thinking we know because his Talmidim, his disciples, wrote up his opinions. The opinion of Rabbeinu Yonah, the opinion of the Hagot Maimoniot, that's he was one of the Talmidim of the Maharama Rottenberg, the opinion of the Mordechai. Well, the list goes on and on and on. There's a long list of great authorities who hold Gam Kain Le'inyan Kriya Shema Ayri, that the understanding of the Gemara is just the opposite of what we have always explained up till this point. In general, the Gemara means to tell us that in general, the singing voice of women is prohibited for men, and even in Kriya Shema. We were looking at the other way around. According to Rav Haigon, the singing voice of women is prohibited in Kriya Shema, and maybe in certain other situations as well, if she's a married woman. The Gra points out that this opinion, the lenient opinion of Rav Haigon, is more or less a das yachid, a maverick opinion, the opinion of one great authority against all of the others, and the long list, the vast majority of poskim hold that the meaning of the Gemara is that the singing voice of the woman is always prohibited for men in every situation, and even in Kriya Shema. Well, what do you mean, even in Kriya Shema? Well, the possibility of erotic diversion, the possibility of erotic stimulation is surely far less when you are engaged in holy activities. In general, we want to avoid the erotic stimulation of the singing voice of the woman, and even in a situation where you might think there's no problem of eroticism because you're focusing on God, you're focusing on holy activities, even in Kriya Shema, even when you're focusing on Kedusha activities, when you might think that erotic contemplation is less of a problem, even there you should not hear the singing voice of the woman. Well, we have now a majority view, and one can draw up the lists, and the majority view is much larger. According to the majority view, the singing voice of the woman is always prohibited, even during Kriya Shema. On the other hand, these are still the words of the Gra, even though the vast majority is on the strict side, Vol Harosh Vatur Katvu the Lo Mari Indian Kriya Shema, the Rosh and the Tur, two of the great writers from, well, Rosh was originally one of the Balya Tosafot. He was the last of the great Balya Tosafot from France, but he lived in Spain. He got a job as a rabbi in Spain, so he straddled the fence between the Ashkenaz side and the Sephardi side. And his son, the Tur, was born and as a young man lived in Ashkenaz territory, moved with his father to Spain. So the Torah was the first great halachic code to combine Ashkenaz and Sephardic traditions together. They hold that the prohibition is even not during Kriya Shema. The Chena Rambam, well, not only is the majority a very big majority, but the big names are on the majority side, prohibiting the singing voice of women in general. And we should be strict according to the majority view. In this case, not only a large majority view, but the big names are all on the majority side. Now, before we continue, let me make a methodological observation. People like me, well, I don't know if there are other people like me, but I like to view, I'm not alone in this, I like to view the history of halacha as a growing, evolving, developing system. Halacha, as it was in the 12th century, was not the same as it was in the 15th century. The way it was in the 15th century is not the same as it was in the 18th century, and today is even different. Halacha is a changing, growing, evolving system. This idea is formulated by the great poskim with the following formulation. Halacha ke'acharon, here you have it spelled correctly on chat. Halacha ke'acharon, where there is a machloket, where there is a disagreement among the great authorities, we follow the acharon. It's the more recent authority, the younger authority, the more recent authority who prevails where there is a disagreement over the generations. Now, since this formulation, halacha ke'acharon, halacha follows the more recent opinion, is broadly accepted by the great poskim, it seems quite clear, doesn't it, that one cannot embrace the principle, the methodological principle of following the more recent authority unless you simultaneously hold that the history of halacha is a changing one, a developing one, an evolving one, and it is the most recent. Form of halacha, which is definitive. The fact that an opinion existed back in the days of the Gaonim, in the early Middle Ages, the fact that a lenient opinion existed back then is all very interesting, but as far as bottom line decision is concerned, if in the course of time an opinion, in this case a maverick opinion of Rav Hai Gaon, a lenient opinion, if it is rejected by later poskim, then we have no choice but to embrace the opinions of the more recent poskim. I'll give you an example outside of the world of Torah, and you'll understand right away how it works. Imagine for a moment that I am a defense lawyer representing a criminal defendant in some court somewhere in France, in North America. I don't care where in the world we are. I'm the defense attorney representing a criminal defendant. And I speak to the court and I say, Judge, it's true that my client did what he's accused of doing. It's absolutely true. But Judge, 300 years ago in our country, the law was different. And 300 years ago, what my client did was not a crime at all. Judge, please decide the case according to the way the law was 300 years ago in our country. You sense the absurdity of an argument like this. Well, lahavdil kama alfei hamdalas, when we say halacha ka'acharon, halacha is always in accord with the more recent opinion, the evolved state, the developed state, the changed, the more recent state of halacha. We're saying the same thing. The historical opinions are all very interesting, but when they have been rejected in the course of time, of course, we have to embrace the more recent opinions. Now, for someone like me, this is sometimes a little bit of an uncomfortable position, but I'm more or less stuck with it. You know, even if I'm unhappy with the opinions of some contemporary rabbis, well, I don't care about some rabbis. When I'm unhappy with the opinion of the mainstream of contemporary rabbis, well, I just have to learn to live with my unhappiness. If such and such is the opinion of the mainstream of contemporary rabbis, well, that represents the evolved state, the current state of halacha, and we're stuck with it. So be it. That's the way halacha has changed. Now, the reason for all of this is a very simple reason. If you think about it for a moment, you'll know that rabbis, by their very nature, tend to be very conservative people, slow to change. It takes an awful lot to motivate a rabbi to reject the opinions, to oppose the opinions, to disagree with the opinions of his great predecessors. The weight of the previous generations of great rabbis is the weight weighs very strongly upon the shoulders of contemporary rabbis. Rabbis will not reject the opinions of earlier poskim unless they have overwhelming reason to do so. And therefore, when the more recent rabbis do reject the opinions of the older ones, we of course have to follow the more recent rabbis. One exception would be, it doesn't apply so much anymore, but in the old days, one exception would be if the more recent rabbis did not know what the earlier ones wrote. Today, printing is cheap. Today, every rabbi has access to the words of the rabbis of the previous generations, but it wasn't always so. For example, the Shach in his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch often rejects the opinion of the Taz, so saying the Taz would not have said what he said if he had a copy of the Rashba. If the words of the Rashba were available in his town, he would not have drawn the conclusion he drew. He just didn't know what the earlier poskim wrote because they didn't have those manuscripts in the town where he lived. If the rabbis do not know the opinions of the earlier rabbis, which in earlier generations was indeed a possibility because manuscripts were not available everywhere, then the fact that they disagreed with the earlier rabbis is not very significant. Had they known what the earlier rabbis said, they might not have come to the conclusions they did. They might not have disagreed. Bottom line, in a case like this, I see no escape. I see no other option other than embracing the approach of the Gra, the Gaon Mevilna, and even though a more lenient opinion does exist in the history of halacha, and Rav Hai Gaon was a great rabbi, in the bottom line, there's no way that we can actually rely upon that more lenient opinion. Let's go one step further. The words of the Shulchan Aruch are as follows. The Shulchan Aruch says, Yesh lizaher, we have to prohibit, Shmias kol zemer shel isha, the singing voice of a woman, b'shas kriya shma, while we are engaged in Shema Yisrael. Oh, the Shulchan Aruch, and surely there's no more influential book than that. The Shulchan Aruch is apparently embracing the lenient view. Apparently, it's only during Kriya Shema and Kedusha activities, sheyesh lizaher, when we must prohibit the singing voice of the women. Well, the Shulchan Aruch is taking the lenient view. It's not only Rav Hai Gaon. Rav Hai Gaon's leniency is embraced by the Shulchan Aruch, apparently. Well, this is becoming even more and more interesting, but still doesn't help us to a bottom line leniency, because after all, the Shulchan Aruch was from the beginning of the 16th century. The Gra, the Gaon Mevilna, was from the 18th century, 200 years later. We still don't have a lot of room here to grasp the leniency. The Darchei Moshe, written by Rav Moshe Isserles, everyone knows that the author of the Shulchan Aruch was Rabbi Yosef Karo. Rabbi Yosef Karo was a great Sephardic authority. Therefore, where there are differences between the Sephardic and the Ashkenaz authorities, the Shulchan Aruch, of course, almost always follows the Sephardic authorities. He was a Sephardi. That's only to be expected. Rav Moshe Isserles, contemporary of the Shulchan Aruch, early 16th century, Rav Moshe Isserles from Poland, Krakow in Poland, of course, on the Ashkenaz team, he wrote notes, first on the Tur, and then on the Shulchan Aruch, bringing the Ashkenaz opinions. Where the Ashkenaz team where the Ashkenaz team disagrees with the Sephardic rabbis, there'll be an exposition of the Ashkenaz position in the notes on the Shulchan Aruch. That's the Darchei Moshe that we're about to quote. And in his notes on the Shulchan Aruch, he'll just give you the brief conclusion where the Ashkenaz authorities disagree with the Sephardic authorities. These are the words of Rav Moshe Isserles representing the Ashkenaz team. Linire, it seems to me, by this he means the Ashkenaz poskim, af below Zehiris, yesh lachush mishum isur me'achai rabim osrim. Since the majority view is strict regarding the singing voice of women, even if you don't take the approach of following the more recent posek, the methodology of following the majority, and the Torah itself commands us to follow the majority, since the Torah commands us to follow the majority, and in this case, the majority view, large majority view, is on the strict side. Well, we cannot accept the leniency of limiting the prohibition of the singing voice of women only to Shema Yisrael situations. Now we have two methodological reasons, each of which leads to the strict conclusion. The idea of halacha as a developing, evolving system forces us to the strict conclusion, and as the Ramah Rav Moshe Isserles points out, following the majority view is another methodology, another way of finding halachic conclusions, bottom line conclusions, and this too forces us to the strict position. After all, the Torah commands us, Acharei Rabim Lahatot, in Parashat Mishpatim, Acharei Rabim Lahatot, if the judges on the court, whether it's a court of 3 judges for minor cases or a court of 70 judges for major cases, if the judges on the court disagree about what the verdict should be, the Torah commands us to follow the majority of opinions. Well, if the Torah commands us to follow the majority of opinions, and in this case, the majority is crystal clear, well, we're again forced to the strict conclusion. Now, before examining the leniencies that do exist among contemporary rabbis, and there are plenty, and we're going to get to them, before doing that, I want to deal with an issue which we've ignored up till this point, namely, what exactly is the definition of song? Since we are prohibiting the singing voice of women, we must have some method of distinguishing exactly between the singing voice of the women, which is prohibited, and the speaking voice, which is permitted. What is the definition of singing as opposed to speaking, which creates the prohibition? Well, we can focus on this by looking at the words of the Ben Yehoyada. Ben Yehoyada, the sefer we're about to quote, was written by the great rabbi of Baghdad in the 19th century, the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai was still is of immense influence. It's hard to point to a more influential rabbinic authority than the Ben Ish Chai that we're about to quote. Lullabies, correct. Lullabies, even in the midst of, we'll come to leniencies after this excursion to define what is singing. We'll come to leniencies which do exist among the Acharonim, and lullabies for the babies are going to turn out to be okay. But we'll come to that later. The Ben Ish Chai writes as follows. He begins by quoting the Gemara. The Gemara says, Shasina Chamra, I will drink wine. As I will sell. The rabbi in the Gemara, the Talmudic rabbi says, I will drink wine. I will celebrate. Well, why is he going to celebrate? Berikuda da'avuch u'akorkachei de'imach. I am going to celebrate. I will drink wine when your father dances. The rabbi is speaking to the fiancé. He's going to get married. And the rabbi says to the fiancé, at your wedding, when your father dances, I will drink wine and celebrate your marriage. And when your mother kukurikus, when your father dances and your mother kukurikus at your wedding, I will drink wine and celebrate. Now, what's he talking about? The father is going to dance and the mother is going to kukuriku. What's going to happen at this wedding? Klomar, what the rabbi meant in the Talmud is Avich yiraked v'imech mizameret zimrat nashim. Your father is going to dance at your wedding, and your mother is going to sing in the way of women. What is the way of women to sing at a wedding? If you have ever attended a Sephardic wedding, whether it's a wedding of descendants from Baghdad, the city of the Ben Ish Chai, or anywhere else in the Sephardic world, from North Africa, it doesn't matter from where in the Sephardic world, if you've attended a wedding of Hatan v'Kala from the Sephardic world, you have almost surely heard the mothers singing in the way of women. Behotza'at kol bilvad, a sound comes out of their voice, as a sound comes out of their mouth, sound only, no words, bapeh, sounds come out of the women's mouth at the weddings, karim b'lashon Aravi, and in Arabic, that's called halal. In Arabic, it's called halal. That's at least in Iraqi Arabic. You have on the screen the more common dialectical words in Arabic for this kind of song. But in Iraq, in Baghdad, it was and still is to this day called halal. If you've never attended a Sephardic wedding and never actually heard it, just visit YouTube and you'll be able to hear plenty of examples on YouTube. Ein motzi'im tevot. There are no words in this women's song. It's just sound. In English, the technical name for this sound is ululation, and it's a kol lashon bilvat. It's only the sound of music. And the great rabbi of the Gemara says to the Hatan, when your mother sings, I will dance, quite clearly implying that there's no particular prohibition for men to hear the ululation, this kind of song, in the mouths of the women. I'm unable to do it. I would demonstrate for you, but I'm unable to do it. The hu olev v'yored b'toch hapeh b'hotzat kol. The sounds, the tones go up and down in the women's voice. Kedarkan shel nashim la'asot kein b'chatuna kayotze. Women sing this song in weddings and at other joyous events, whether it's a brit milah or whatever the simcha event is. Women in the Sephardic world sing this song. That's what the Talmud is talking about. And the great rabbi says, when I hear your mother singing, I shall rejoice and drink wine at your joyous event. Quite clearly implying that there's no prohibition at all for men to hear the ululation of women. Bivadai ishto shel hanasi ein darka la'asot kein. Well, the Rebbitzin, the wife of the head of the community, the chief Rebbitzin of the community probably didn't do that. Probably didn't ululate in public. She probably wouldn't be caught dead ululating in public. The Gemara doesn't use the Arabic word for this song, halachil. The Gemara uses the ancient Aramaic word, kukuriku. It's only a kind of kirkur, a kind of kikuriku in the voice. There are no whole words. Okay, now what the Ben Ish Chai has done so far, we haven't finished his words, what he's done is to demonstrate for us that according to the Talmudic text, there is a kind of song which men were hearing from the mouths of women at religious events, at weddings, at a brit milah, at a bar mitzvah, and so forth and so on. The celebratory song of the women is what the men heard, and apparently no one objected. Apparently, the Gemara knows how to tell you something's prohibited. When the Gemara thinks something is prohibited, the Gemara just mentions the story in passing and sees nothing wrong with it. So this kind of singing is apparently fine. The Ben Ish Chai, the great rabbi of Baghdad, 19th century, continues and says like this: Nira, it would seem, Ki zimra zo shel nashim hi haita mizman darot rishonim. This kind of singing, which the Sephardic women do at weddings and other simcha events, is of ancient origin. It's mentioned in the Talmud positively. It's mentioned positively in the Talmud. Matzina b'Midrash Rabbah, and we see an example in the Midrash. In antiquity, the Midrash mentions this as well. Let's take a look at the words of the Midrash. Hayu mekalsin kadmoi va'amrin ha leah, he leah. The Gemara, the Midrash mentions a song that the women were singing. In a moment, we'll see the context of this song. And, back in those days, they didn't have musical notes, like we have a staff with clefs. We have fairly precise ways of indicating musical tones. They didn't have that in those days. And when the Midrash tries to tell us the melody of this song that the women were singing, it says, ha leah, he leah. What the Midrash is referring to is the ululation of women at simcha events. The Midrash is referring to the halachil song, the song which Sephardic women sing at weddings, at bar mitzvahs, at brit milah, and so forth and so on. It's true that the Midrash didn't actually give us the notes. They didn't have notation back in those days. But it's quite clear what the Midrash is referring to. And as the Midrash states, it's the women who were singing this song. And to this very day, in Sephardic communities, it's the women who sing it and not the men. Maybe that's what I can do. We'll see in a moment the source of the entire Midrash, and we'll understand the background. It's the women who were singing this way. Yaakov, who's present for this song in the Midrash. Yaakov, of course, never paid attention to these matters. Mishum to Kol Isha erva. Yaakov Avinu was, of course, not erotically diverted, not erotically stimulated by this. He found no eroticism in it. And we're going to see the Midrash where Yaakov apparently did not object to being present during this song. Let's take a look at the Midrash, the full text of the Midrash to which he's referring. This is the Midrash. And here you have the precise source of the Midrash that he's referring to. The Yesuf Lavan at Kol Anshe Makom. Lavan, not one of the heroes of Chumash, the opposite of the hero, but Lavan gathered together the people in town. The Yas Mishteh. And Lavan made a celebratory party. They had a big celebration. Lavan gathered all the whole population together and said, "Come on, guys, let's celebrate." Kines Kol Anshe Makom. The whole population was invited to this celebration that Lavan scheduled. Amalem. Well, Lavan said to them, Yodim atem shahinu dehukim lamayim. We had a drought here. We're celebrating the end of a drought. Big celebration, the end of a drought. Lavan announced. We had a drought, no water. Kevan Shabbat Tzadik Hazeh, Since Yaakov came to town, since this great tzaddik came to town, Lachein Nizbarchu Hamayim, the water is blessed. And now we have rain again. Now we have water. Let's celebrate that Yaakov, the great tzaddik, has come to town, and in his merit, we now have abundance of water. Amrinle, the people of the town, said to Lavan, Hanilach, what did you get out of the deal? How do you benefit? What's your benefit going to be if we come to your party? You're just inviting us out of your own goodwill. No one does that. You're just inviting us to eat and drink at your celebration. No one just does that. You must be expecting some benefit. You must be expecting some playback, some payback. What payback do you expect from us if we attend your celebration? Lavan responded to the people, you want to know what payback I expect if I give you wine and drink and food at a celebration? You want to know what I want back from you guys? In ba'inatun, anamarame be v'yachiv le'leah. Tahu rachim lahada rachel sagi. If you want, guys, he's talking to his friends in town, I'm going to defraud Yaakov. I'm going to trick Yaakov and switch my daughters at his wedding. I'm going to cheat him. I'm going to cheat Yaakov and give him Leah instead of Rachel. That's what he did, and the people in the town were all participating, were all involved in the fraud. That's the payback that Lavan wanted from the party. I'm reading like said to him, if that's what you want, go for it. We're happy to participate in your defrauding of Yaakov. Just bring on the wine and the celebration. He said to them, I don't want anyone to let the secret out. We're going to defraud Yaakov, we're going to trick him, but I'm afraid that someone is going to blab, someone in town is going to let the secret out, and if Yaakov hears our plans, all will be ruined. I want a mashkon, I want a pledge from you guys. I want a pledge that none of you is going to reveal the secret, that mum's the word, and no one's going to reveal our plan to defraud the Yaakov. I want a pledge from you guys, a mashkon. Yavai mashkonin. They all gave him pledges. I mean, objects of value. They all gave him objects of Laban. This is an object of value from our house. Hold on to it. And if you catch us revealing the secret, the pledge is yours. Well, now Yaakov was confident that the people would keep the secret and he'd be able to defraud Yaakov. Also, now the party began, and Lavan brought on the food and the meat and the wine and everything else because he had the deal that he wanted. The population of town would support him in the defrauding of Yaakov. That's why Lavan is called Lavan Ha'arami, Lavan the defrauder. That's why we call him Lavan Ha'arami, Lavan the defrauder, because that's what he did. He defrauded not only Yaakov, but the people of town. And because of this trick, everyone's praising him. Everyone loved him. Great party, Lavan, great party. We love it. Kevan da'al b'ramsa, amalahon. Well, now the party drew to an end. It's late at night. And Lavan said, enough. Aren't you guys going to go home? Shouldn't the party end? Amrile, the people said to him, late at night, they wanted the party to go on. They didn't want the party to end. At gemalt hesed b'zchutach, v'hayu makalsin kadamai, v'amrin ha leah, he leah. You, Lovin, are a great provider of kindness for us. You're giving us this great party, and we're going to sing for you. And how did they sing? Hallelujah, hallelujah, Hileah, Hileah, the halachil, the ululation of women was sung for Lavan in order to celebrate the great fraud. And Yaakov was involved in this and did not object. And therefore, we have a good proof that there's no problem of men being present at a Sephardic wedding, at a Sephardic bar mitzvah, a Sephardic bris milah, it doesn't matter what, where the women are performing this song, this ululation, this halachil, and this is clearly permitted. It's mentioned in the Gemara. It has sources in the Midrash. We have ancient sources according to which this song is entirely permitted for men to hear. Well, one of the great contemporary Sephardic rabbis today, in his Olat Yitzchak says, "Shamati she'efshar shetam hetem mipnei shekol zeh eino miyuchad la." I heard the reason that we permit the ululation of women at weddings and so forth is because you can't distinguish one woman's voice. All the women do it together, and it's a chorus, and you can't distinguish one woman's voice. The Olas Yitzchak, or Yitzchak Ratzabi says, someone told me that's the reason why it's okay. The sound is not the normal sound of singing. Even people who know the various women, neighbors, they hear the various women speaking, they know the voices of the various women, can't tell which sounds come from which women's mouth. This is the keening of mourning, the keening of mourners, the singing of dirges, and so forth and so on. Correct. Exactly the same. But this reason might not be, people like me are not particularly musical. If I listen to the Philharmonic Orchestra and I hear the choir of violins performing their part, several violins playing together, depending upon the size of the orchestra. And, I might hear that one of the violinists is not exactly in tune. I might hear there's a problem of intonation with one of the violinists, but the truth is I've got the vaguest idea which one it is. And that's because I'm not particularly musical, and I can't identify which violinist it is who has a problem in intonation. The conductor, on the other hand, who is very musical, he hears exactly which violinist it is who has the problem. And therefore, this idea that you cannot identify which sound is coming from which woman's voice, that's an idea which might apply to people who are not very musical, but people who are musical can surely tell which sounds come from which women. The real reason why ululation is permitted, the real reason why halachil is a permitted kind of sound coming from the mouths of women, is because it's not a zemer. This is not what is meant by song. It's the singing voice of women which is prohibited, and this is not the singing voice. Now, this opens up a number of very interesting possibilities. Everyone knows what an ordinary song is, but sometimes ordinary singing is accompanied by extraordinary singing. For example, there's scat. If you don't know what scat is, it's a very unusual use of the voice. You can hear Shulam Leber doing it very well. I don't know if we should mention Fitzgerald or not as being the greatest master of scat, but there's beatboxing, which are sounds produced by the voice, very different from song. And what about ordinary a cappella singing? What about ordinary a cappella? I'm talking about solfege, where the singers sing no words at all, but only the tones of the song. Are any of these or all of these to be considered song and therefore prohibited for men to hear women performing this? There goes Ella Fitzgerald down the tubes if it's prohibited. Or is this not song at all? Well, I'm now ready to propose, and this is just a proposal, nothing definitive about it. Here's a proposal for a way of distinguishing between song, which is prohibited, and speaking or other uses of the voice, which are permitted. Here goes. Anyone who is encouraged by their physician to exercise, I don't know if performance is a criterion. Anyone who is encouraged to exercise, the doctor says to the patient, you want your heart to be healthy, you got to exercise. You can't be a couch potato all the time. Get out and exercise. And the patient asks the doctor, Doc, how much should I exercise? And the doctor says, well, you should go walking, you should swim, you should do some exercise. And how do you know? How do you know when you've reached the correct level of exertion? Well, if you're exercising by walking, for example, it doesn't matter what your form of exercise is. If you're walking and you begin to get out of breath, that's the level of exercise I want you to do. But you should still be able to have a conversation with someone that you're exercising with. Even though you're beginning to get out of breath, you can still have a conversation with someone. If you find that you're so out of breath that you can't even have a conversation, you can't even talk clearly, I don't want you to go that far. I just want you to get to the level where the heart is working hard, the lungs are working, your lungs are working strong, but you can still conduct a conversation. However, you will be unable, if you get to the stage of exercise where you are no longer able to sing, that's too much. I don't want you to put that much stress on the heart. I don't want you to put so much stress on the heart that your heart is working so hard, your lungs are working so hard that you are unable to sing. What's the difference between song and ordinary speech? Ordinary speech requires far less control of the musculature. In order to sing, one needs far more precise control over the muscles. And I'm talking about an awful lot of muscles here. The muscles of the diaphragm and the lateral muscles which control the lungs, the muscles which control the voice box, the muscles which control the organs of articulation in the mouth. We're talking about a coordination of a lot of muscles simultaneously. But song requires very fine control over the muscles. Ordinary speech, ordinary conversation requires far less muscular control over much less muscular control in order to have ordinary speech. I propose this as a possible way of distinguishing between song and ordinary speech. One thing is clear, not only according to the poskim we've seen, but according to the common minhag, according to the common practice, which here is another methodology of deciding halacha. What is the common practice of the people? The common practice, the minhag, is surely to permit ululation halachil at joyous events. Let's take these ideas one step further. Uh, at this point, we're going to turn to the opinions of the Acharonim regarding Shirei Kodesh. This is the first of a series of situations in which the great contemporary rabbis see room for leniency. The first, and this is part of the series, the first of the areas in which the great contemporary rabbis see room for leniency in permitting men to hear the singing voice of women is Shirei Kodesh. If we're not talking about Mozart, we're not talking about jazz. We're talking about holy songs, Zemirot of Shabbat, or other holy situations. Some rabbis, whom we're about to see room for leniency. Let's see the basis for leniency first, b'kerev mishpacha, within the family circle. At the moment, we're going to talk about other situations later, but at the moment we're talking about leniencies which exist within the family circle. What the Ramah says in the Shulchan Aruch is, Kol haragil bo eno erva. What is and what is not erotically stimulating depends a lot upon what you are accustomed to. I know that what I'm about to say doesn't apply to every family, but what I'm about to say applies in general to siblings, brothers and sisters. Brothers and sisters who grow up together in the same family, in general, do not find each other to be erotically stimulating. Do you have siblings? Are you a woman? Do you have brothers? Are you a man? Do you have sisters? What I'm talking about is the ordinary family where brother and sister grew up together. What do I mean grew up together? What do brothers and sisters do when they grow up together? They fight with each other. Did you fight with your siblings when you were growing up, in a normal family situation? Well, brother and sister who grow up with each other, in general, have no erotic interest in the other sibling. Same thing between father and daughter, same thing between mother and son, within the family circle. I know there's such a thing as incest, and I know what I'm saying doesn't apply to all families, but in general, erotic stimulation is absent within the family circle. And what the Ramah says is that the singing voice of the woman is prohibited unless we're talking about a voice which you are accustomed to hearing all the time. The brother who grew up hearing the singing voice of the sister, the father who, as the daughter grew up, heard the daughter's singing voice all the time, or the mother's singing voice. These are not erotic situations. These are not songs which lead to erotic stimulation, and therefore, according to this, it follows that at least within the family circle there is room for leniency. That's the opinion of the Ramah, the Ashkenaz commentator on the Shulchan Aruch. Aaron grew up hearing Miriam sing, of course, and what do I know about their childhood? Did they grow up as typical brother and sister and fight with each other? How would I know? But if you have siblings, you know what I'm talking about when I say that siblings grow up fighting with each other. Now, the Shulchan Aruch Harav, the Shulchan Aruch of the Baal HaTanya, the first of the Lubavitch dynasty, the first of the Lubavitch dynasty, wrote as follows, a very important observation here. He said, Kol Zemer Shel Isha Ben Penuya Ben Eshet Ish, the singing voice of a woman, whether she's single or married. If she's married, then erotic stimulation gets you closer to adultery. But it doesn't matter whether she's married or not married. Afilu shel ishto, even the singing voice of your own wife, the erva. You can't even hear the singing voice of your own wife during those parts of the month when marital intercourse is prohibited. During those parts of the month when husband and wife are required by the Torah to be separate, he's not even allowed to hear the singing voice of his own wife because that could be erotic for him. And we definitely don't want erotic stimulation between husband and wife during the period of the month when marital intercourse is prohibited. Asur lekrot kriyat shema kisha sham'ol. Whether it is that part of the month or not, he cannot hear her singing voice while he's reading Shema Yisrael. The wife's singing voice will be distracting for him, and if he's reading Kriya Shema, no, he cannot hear the singing voice of his wife. If he's davening or doing any Kedusha activity, even the singing voice of his wife is prohibited. Aval kol dibura. But if he's only speaking, since he is accustomed to hear the speaking voice all the time, since he's accustomed to hearing the speaking voice all the time, that's not erotically stimulating for him. And even if she's singing while he reads Shema, if he is able to ignore the singing of his wife and concentrate on Shema Yisrael, mutar, that's okay. So the Shulchan Aruch Harav, one of the influential poskim, not only in the Hasidic world, especially in the Hasidic world, but not only in the Hasidic world. Mishnah Brura quotes and relies upon the Shulchan Aruch Harav hundreds and hundreds of times. Says within the family circle, if there's going to be any erotic distraction, no. But if the man can overcome and ignore the erotic distraction of the wife within the family circle, then mutar, then it's okay. So here we've just begun to open up a little door to introduce certain leniencies that might exist as far as this prohibition is concerned. We're going to pause at this point, and beginning next week, we'll see where this discussion leads, and we'll begin to array one after another the leniencies which exist among great contemporary poskim in these matters. Until next week, I wish you a good week and eventually a Shabbat Shalom, and look forward to seeing you all again next week for the lenient side of this discussion. Until then, Shalom Shalom.